Every single day, I receive tens of emails asking me to make a myriad of different kinds of content, whether that be elaborating on half-baked theories, diving into elaborate pages-long what-ifs written by fans, or even just answering the lingering questions of those that have either watched or read Naruto and felt that at the end of the story, the questions that they had were never truly answered. And while I don't end up using the majority of these emails for any type of content, occasionally one email will shine through with something like a question I've never heard asked before, a plot hole I never identified, or a theory I've never thought about, and thus a video is born. But today, I don't want to talk about those shining golden emails. Today, I want to talk about an email that I've been ignoring for years. And that email that I've been ignoring for years is actually hundreds of emails that are all some kind of iteration of what's going on with the daimyo. See, over the course of my career as a content creator, I've built up a reputation that I'm the guy who knows everything about Naruto. And I do. However, there's a lot of people who know everything about Naruto. So why am I the most successful currently? Well, because at least I believe I'm pretty good at identifying the things that the Naruto fandom wants to hear about. And thus, by understanding what you want to see, I'm able to give you what you want, and thus views, followers, fame, money, fortune. And thus, the idea of me doing a deep dive into how the politics of the Naruto universe works is never really something that I thought, oh, the fans need this. And yet, here we are. I simply can't ignore the emails any longer. I have to clear this up for the masses. It's my job. And thus today we're going to be talking everything that you need to know about the political world in Naruto, which is an awful title, so we're gonna workshop it. But before we get into our poli-sci lesson on a fictional universe, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the concept of me clearing up hazy concepts from your favorite anime and manga, then you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. And if you just want to see the concept of my brain become hazy, then you're gonna love my anime podcast, Talk is Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We just celebrated 1 year with the Drunk Pod, and boy oh boy, did it not go well. But speaking of Otakus Anonymous, if you guys want to look like you are otakus and don't want to be anonymous about it, guys, go ahead and meander on over into my merch store, takusanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, sticker packs on demand. But before we get into all that, today we're going to talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Factor. Factor is my favorite sponsor because Factor is the only sponsor that I have that keeps me running. Factor provides 2-minute meals that fuel me up fast with restaurant quality food that are ready to heat and eat wherever I am. But they do so much more than just 2-minute meals. They also provide snacks, smoothies, and so much more. In fact, they provide a wide variety of easy options for the entire day, like breakfast or midday bites. And because of the convenience that Factor has injected into my life, I'm now able to film way more content than I would have been able to otherwise, as the convenience of not having to worry about what's for lunch has saved me hours a week. Not to mention that the low-calorie, high-protein options that I select make sure that I'm always crushing my macros. But there's a big difference between telling and showing, so let's head down to the kitchen and I'll show you just why Factor meals are truly so incredible.
Today we're going to be cooking up and eating the jalapeno beef mac and cheese. Let me show you just how easy it is to prepare these meals. All I gotta do is slide off that protective layer, punch a couple of holes in the film like so. Microwave on high for 2 to 3 minutes. I like to split the diff. And it'll be done soon.
And it's done, so let's try it. That is good. It's well seasoned. It's got a little spice. That cheese is creamy. Let's try the broccoli. It's cooked perfectly. Also, well seasoned.
What are you guys waiting for? Go to factor75.com or click the link in my description and use code NCHammer2350 at checkout to get 50% off your first Factor box and wellness shots for life. That's right, 2 free wellness shots from the 3 available flavors with your order of Factor for the rest of your life for completely free. Once again, guys, that's factor75.com or use the link in my description and use code NCHammer2350 for 50% off your first Factor box and free wellness shots for life. Never worry about what's for lunch again. So, politics. About time we finally got into them on this channel. Because if this channel is anything, it's historically non-political. Never once on this page have I ever even discussed the formation of the Taliban, Oliver North, Reaganomics. Keep it to anime, that's what I always say. But unfortunately for everybody simply triggered by the word politics in the first place, don't worry, the politics we're going to be talking about today have nothing to do with the big bad scary world. Because today we're doing a deep dive into the politics of the Naruto universe. And the Naruto world doesn't have a two-party system. It's kind of got a 4-level system. See, the Naruto universe has 4 levels of what I would identify as governing bodies. At the bottom of the list, there's shinobi. Above them are the Kage, above them are the daimyo, and above the daimyo are the Council of Elders. And that's actually everything you need to know. But for me, please make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Bye, everybody. God, those idiots.
Nick, I don't understand a daimyo. I understand the Hokage. Who's in charge? Oh, I'm a head village.
Oh, are we? Yeah, we're still recording. That's just an impersonation I'm working on for a completely separate video. No, but in actuality, the governing forces of the Naruto universe are a bit more complicated than just 4 levels. But by using those 4 levels as a basis for understanding, it'll help me fleshing out what the political universe looks like in a detailed way a lot easier. So let's start with that layered system and talk about our lowest rung on the ladder, shinobi. Shinobi, as a governing body, are probably the least complicated out of any of the rungs of this ladder, as shinobi are in essence just soldiers. But soldiers more akin to an army than a police force. As we know, individual villages have both a shinobi army and a police force. And therefore, in actuality, shinobi holds no real power over internal affairs. They are meant for wars, missions, and the protection of the country, not to govern over the populace as a police force. Now, obviously, there is a fair amount of bleed between shinobi and the police force of a village, as the police force are more often than not only just police, but also shinobi. And a good example of this is the Uchiha clan, who were the majority of the police force within Konoha until something like a war kicked up, and then the majority of the police force would put on their shinobi outfits and go to war. But usually there is a separation between the police force and the shinobi army, as the police force doesn't take on ninja missions, and the shinobi don't have to bother with making sure the populace isn't committing crimes. But shinobi do hold a certain amount of authority over the populace of the country they belong to. But not because any governmental body has said, oh, you have to listen to shinobi, but for the same reason that if the town you were in was getting invaded by some other country, you would listen to the army soldiers around you. So the line is somewhat hazy between shinobi and police force, but they come together to represent the lowest rung of the governmental bodies that control the hidden villages and the hidden village countries. Now, to get even more minute than that, amongst the shinobi, there is obviously a ranking system. You start as an academy student, and once you pass through the shinobi academy, you become a genin. Once you pass the chunin exams, you become a chunin. And once you're deemed skilled enough, you become a jonin. Now, genin are usually tasked with D to C ranked missions, which are usually considered to have next to no risk associated with their completion. And by taking on these low ranking missions, the genin are starting on their journey of making the village money, as missions are completed for one of 2 reasons. Either because the daimyo of the country wants something completed, or because an individual has come to the hidden village with a request. Now, usually if a daimyo requests a mission from the hidden village, that won't be a D or C ranked mission, probably falling somewhere closer to A or S. However, missions requested by individuals who are willing to pay for ninja work, like escort missions, protection details, or just finding somebody's lost cat, those kinds of missions are brought forward to the shinobi mission system by individuals who pay for that work. And they pay in accordance to the difficulty of the task they're asking for. And usually the majority of these tasks fall into the C/D categorization, which means it falls into the hands of genin. But after genin, we have chunin, which genin have to pass the chunin exam to become. Now, as many of you might already know, the chunin exam was created by Tobirama to simulate a warlike environment, and thus only genin who would be able to survive in an element like that are able to become chunin. And while a lot of you are probably saying, but yeah, so many genin died in the chunin exams in Naruto, they weren't meant to be that deadly. But a lot of things that Tobirama set up to save children ended up being bastardized by later iterations of Konoha, so I guess who cares? And thus those who are able to survive in a warlike environment simulated by the chunin exams would be gleaned not only strong enough, but also old enough to enter into war. Because mind you, you can only take the Chunin exam after you pass the Shinobi Academy, because you have to be a Genin to take the Chunin exams. And since the Shinobi Academy has a minimum age requirement, and the coursework for the Shinobi Academy is said to take a couple of years, the Chunin exams, when working in parallel with the Shinobi Academy, make sure that anybody who becomes a Chunin is old enough to be on the battlefield, thus ensuring the core reason that Konoha was created in the first place, to make sure that no more children die in war. Now, once you become a Chunin, not only are you ready for war, but you're also allowed to take on C and B missions. And on top of this, you can also become an academy teacher, like Shino. Yes, Shino never becomes a Jonin or a Ruka. So becoming a Chunin opens a whole lot of avenues for you. You can go to war, you can take on more difficult missions, or you can go to teach. But there is technically a fourth option. See, because when you become a Chunin, you gain the first level of governmental control, in that you now qualify to be a leader of a Genin squad, which is why Shikamaru, after the Konoha Crush arc, was able to be assigned the leader of the team of Genin that were brought together in order to capture Sasuke. But a Chunin being placed in charge of Genin is a rare scenario. Usually, leading a team of Genin is a right reserved for Jonin. But becoming a Jonin is rather difficult, because when it comes to upgrading your rank, becoming a Jonin is by far and away the most arbitrary. See, because not every Chunin becomes a Jonin. Like we already said, Shino, one of the most powerful members of the original Konoha 12, is still a Chunin. And thus, some Chunin stay Chunin forever, and other Chunin become what is known as a special Jonin, or a Tokubetsu Jonin, which may sound like a higher rank than Jonin, but is actually lower. See, a special Jonin gets their rank by displaying Jonin level strength in one category. However, because they aren't Jonin level in all categories, they can't be considered a full Jonin. The best example of a special Jonin is Ibiki, the head of the torture and interrogation team for Konoha. While he isn't as strong as Asuma, Might Guy, Kakashi, or Kurenai, he's a special Jonin because his interrogation skills and his understanding of the human mind are far beyond anybody else in the village. And thus, because of the talent that he displays in one specific category, he is considered a special Jonin. But if you do display a high enough level of strength in all categories as a Chunin, eventually you will become a Jonin. Now, the required level of strength is unfortunately kind of arbitrary. There's no power level meters in Naruto, but usually the bare minimum bar to become a Jonin is that you're able to use 2 different kinds of elemental release. On top of this, to become a Jonin, you have to be a shinobi that the village would trust to take on missions by yourself, and not just low-ranked missions, A and S-ranked missions. And thus, you being upgraded to a Jonin is based off your mission track record. Do you have a track record of completing a lot of B-ranked missions with relative ease? Cool. Were you a liability to your team? Were you the leader? Were you the strongest person there? Were you the reason that those B-ranked missions were passed with ease? Are you the reason that they were almost not passed at all? And once you take all of that into consideration, if it gleans that you could complete an A or S-ranked mission by yourself, then cool, you're a Jonin now. So cool. Jonin's the highest rank that you can get as a ninja, right? Well, no. Technically, Jonin isn't the highest rank you can get as a ninja. And no, I'm not talking about the Sannin or the Kage, because Sannin is a title made up by Hanzo the Salamander for Orochimaru, Tsunade, and Jiraiya for surviving their battle against him in the Third Great Shinobi World War, and we'll get to the Kage in a bit. See, the title that exists above Jonin in terms of village-wide status and military power conveyed through this title is Anbu Team Leader. And this is why Itachi becoming an Anbu Team Leader at 12 years old was so wildly impressive. Because amongst ninjas, at least in Konoha, Anbu Team Leader is the title that warrants the most respect. Does this mean as an Anbu Team Leader you could go around the village and boss around Jonin? No, the power associated with this title is not governmental, but instead reputation-based. And thus, if you actually want to say that being an Anbu team member is in a higher ranking than Jonin, be my guest. But it's important to note that literally any Anbu team member would already be a Jonin, and thus by becoming an Anbu team member, you are getting an additional rank that runs in conjunction with Jonin. And at least within Konoha, as a shinobi, Anbu team leader is as high as you can reach, without becoming a Kage, that is. Now, be that the Kaze, Ho, Mizo, Rai, or Tsuchi Kage, the Go-Kage stand above all other shinobi in the village, as they themselves have to be a shinobi. But why do the Go-Kage need to be shinobi? Well, there's one unspoken rule in almost every single village, and that is that only the strongest shinobi in the entire village can become the Kage of that village. And while this isn't always the case. We were told this by Hiruzen rather early on in the story. And while the rule may not be carved in stone, more often than not, it does turn out to be true. Now, the other reason that the Gokage have to be shinobi is because the Gokage are essentially the shogun of their individual village. But what is a shogun? I know it might be a term that a lot of you are familiar with, but you may not know the intricacies of what a shogun is and the role they played in Japanese history. See, shoguns ran Japan from 1185 to 1865. That is to say that shoguns ran Japan basically from the Heian period all the way to the Meiji Reformation period. And thus, really the only reason that shoguns ever stepped down from a role of authority is because in 1865, Japan decided to modernize and westernize, which introduced the concept of things like prime ministers. But shoguns were essentially militaristic dictators who controlled Japanese armies, and the shogunate system was initially set up to unify Japanese military forces against barbarians. Now, as to whether or not these barbarians were Japanese mountain people who didn't abide by the rules of the shogunate, or actual invading forces from other countries, did not matter. The shogunate and their unified military forces treated all of these barbarians with an equal amount of hostility and vitriol. But for those of you who even know a little bit about Japan, you'll know that they also have an emperor, and have had one since at least 600 AD. So how do the emperor and the shogun rule together? Well, fortunately for us, it's very similar to how the political system in Naruto works now. See, shinobi are in contractual obligations with the villages they reside in. By becoming a genin and climbing the ranks, you enter into a military contract like anybody in the army, navy, or air force would do in the real world. And the person in charge of you as a contractual soldier to this village is the Kage of your village. They dictate where the forces of the village are sent to, what mission deserves what ranking, and how to pay the soldiers accordingly. But the Gokage in charge of you as a soldier is operating within the confines of a hidden village within a hidden village country. And thus, the hidden village that you are a soldier to is actually a vassal to the daimyo. Now, for those of you who don't know what a vassal is a person from the Middle Ages who received protection and land from a lord in return for loyalty and service. And thus, the hidden village within a hidden village country is a vassal to the daimyo, the ruler of the hidden village country. But how does this work? Well, the Kage of the hidden village that you're a soldier to is technically an employee of the daimyo, in that the daimyo pays your Gokage, and thus they enter into a contractual employee-employer relationship. However, within the confines of this relationship, the daimyo and the Gokage are equals. So even though the daimyo is the Gokage's employer, they are equals. And thus, the Kage of your hidden village, by accepting and completing missions for either the public or the daimyo, is executing the will of the daimyo as a whole. That is to say that a large section of the missions that a village will take on and complete are brought to them and funded by the daimyo, as the daimyo is the village's source of funding outside of citizen brought forth missions. Because Konoha does not collect taxes, the daimyo does. And thus the only way that Konoha can keep itself afloat money-wise is by taking funding from the daimyo, an internal economy, or citizen-funded missions. And thus, in exchange for land and funding from the daimyo, Konoha and all other ninja villages operate as the largest military force of their respective countries, which move under the will of the daimyo. But this doesn't mean that a hidden village is a country's only military force. In fact, all countries have thousands of standard foot soldiers who wield things like bows, katanas, and spears, and who take on missions that are deemed to be lower rank than a D rank mission. Things like guarding the walls of Konoha or guarding the borders of the Land of Fire. Things that don't require a ninja, because ninjas are expensive. The best example of the fact that a hidden village doesn't make up the entirety of a country's militaristic force are the 12 pillars of the Land of Fire. The 12 pillars of the Land of Fire are 12 individual shinobi or monks or just fighters who were said to be some of the strongest in the land. And these 12 pillars were dedicated to protecting the fire daimyo. But only a couple of the 12 pillars that Asuma served beside were ninjas from Konoha, as many of them didn't live in Konoha at all, and some of them weren't shinobi. And thus, while hidden villages represent the majority of the military force of a country, they do not represent the entirety of it. But because they do represent such a large portion portion of a country's military, maintaining a hidden village, at least for a daimyo, is massively expensive, which is why most countries don't have one, as entering into a war that requires thousands of ninjas can be so expensive it bankrupts an entire nation. In fact, the reason that the Second Great Shinobi World War happened in the first place is because of the economic turmoil that the First Great Shinobi World War brought on to all countries outside of Konoha, which is why tons of smaller countries either try to not have a hidden village at all or get rid of their hidden village because it's no longer needed. A good example of the latter would be the Land of Hot Water, where Hidan was born. See, the Land of Hot Water had a hidden village, a small one, but still had one. However, when the Land of Hot Water realized that they were just a tourist destination for people to come and dip their toes in the hot springs, they realized that nobody was going to be invading them anytime soon, and therefore the expense of a hidden village was unnecessary, and thus they scuttled their hidden village. And an example of the former is the Land of Waves, which has to rely on the military power conveyed from non-shinobi foot soldiers for all of their violent conflicts, and thus the role of a daimyo is more akin to an actual governing body than the role of a Gokage, as they are responsible for the collection and redistribution of taxes through things like the building of roads, the waging of wars, and so on and so forth. Well, a Gokage is more like the head of the military, the strongest soldier who will be able to lead the shinobi who all act as vassals to the daimyo into war whenever it's necessary. But since the hidden village that they rule as an entirety acts as a vassal to the daimyo, they're in charge of the day-to-day operations of their vassalship, but they can be called upon for basically anything whenever necessary by the daimyo. And Shikamaru's second light novel does a really good job of elaborating on this relationship, as the Land of Stone daimyo gets bored with the era of peace and sees that both the village hidden in the clouds and Konoha have been building up their technologies as it pertains to war, with the Land of Lightning creating the chakra cannon, a cannon capable of destroying the entire moon in complete secrecy, and Konoha creating things like the shinobi gauntlet and other shinobi tools that modernized what a ninja looked like in Konoha. And thus the Land of Stone daimyo pushed Koretsuchi to try to initiate a war amongst the 5 major villages. And even though Koretsuchi didn't want to do this, she was privy to the wants of her daimyo. But since hidden villages are such an expense, many daimyo have gone the other way, and instead of trying to activate a war, have simply just tried to get rid of their hidden villages and focus their money elsewhere, which is honestly kind of fair. And really, the only daimyo not currently trying to oust their Gokage is Ikkyu, the fire daimyo, who holds Naruto / Shikamaru and Konoha in an incredibly high esteem. Thus, the fire daimyo basically lets Konoha and the Hokage run as they want to. But Ikkyu's political power is not rock solid, and for that matter, the political power of any daimyo is not rock solid, as members of the Council of Elders within Konoha and all other villages have the ability to oust not only Gokage, but also daimyo. And while Naruto was still Hokage, Council of Elders who were being influenced by Kara Outers were actually trying to use their political power to oust both Ikkyu and Naruto. And the reason that they have the power to do this is because the Council of Elders works like Congress does in the real world. All decisions made by the head of the military, the Gokage, and the president, the daimyo, and must run through Congress. And if Congress doesn't approve of these choices, then the head of the military and the president aren't able to move freely, and thus they can't take action officially. And this goes double for the fact that the Council of Elders have the ability to both impeach the president and the head of the military. But becoming a member of the Council of Elders is exceedingly difficult, as it's composed of either people handpicked by the Hokage to join it, which is why we're stuck with Hamura and Koharu, because while operating like Congress, they also operate like the Supreme Court, in that if you're selected to the Council of Elders, unless you step down until you die, you have a seat. But if you're not hand-selected by a Hokage to join the Council of Elders, the only other way to join the Council of Elders is to be a former Gokage, which is why Tsunade and Kakashi are both on Naruto / Shikamaru's Council of Elders. And thus, the TLDR of everything is that the daimyo employs the Kage. The Kage controls the army, and the Council of Elders has the final say on pretty much everything. And with that, you should have as full of an understanding of the Naruto political system as you could ever possibly need. And even though I've been requested to make this video hundreds of times, it's going to be one of my worst performing videos in a long time. But now when somebody asks me to explain the complicated relationship between the daimyo and the Kage, I can just send them this. If you guys now understand the political system of Naruto a little bit better, or think I missed something, tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Well then, who's the House of Representatives, Nick? Who's the House of Representatives?